Kindly like, share and subscribe. The Evil Grin is a scary ghost story about a young girl who goes to visit her friend one evening. When she encounters her friend's mother, the strange smile she sees on the woman's face terrifies her. When I was 12 years old, I had a best friend named Brenda. After school we always went to her house to hang out. She lived in a big house on the edge of town. One day, Brenda didn't show up for school. She was absent for the next few days and I began wondering if there was something wrong with her. After she had missed a whole week of school, I decided to pay her a visit. I cycled all the way across town and arrived at her house just as it was getting dark outside. When I rang the doorbell, I got a shock when the door opened almost immediately. Brenda's mother was standing in the doorway, but there was something strange about her. Her eyes seemed darker than usual and her hair was hanging loose around her shoulders. I noticed that she was wearing a bathrobe. The most unsettling thing was the way she was grinning at me. She didn't say a word. She just stood there staring at me with an evil smile playing across her lips. "Is Brenda here?" I asked, nervously. She beckoned at me to come in and before I could say anything, she had slipped back into the darkened house. As I stepped inside, my eyes strained to see in the darkness, but I wasn't sure where she had gone. Just then, I heard a strange humming sound and followed it into the kitchen. I found her there, standing at the kitchen sink with her back towards me. The moment I entered the kitchen, she stopped humming and there was an eerie silence. I took a seat at the kitchen table and waited. She seemed to be taking forever. I spent the next 5 minutes just sitting there, wondering what was going on. Then I realized something very odd. The whole time I had been sitting there, she hadn't moved a muscle. Her back was still towards me and I couldn't see her face. Her hands hung limp by her sides and her head was tilted slightly. Something was very wrong. I stood up nervously and approached her. She remained completely still. Ever so slowly, I moved around her and tried to get a look at her face to see if she was all right. The sight still haunts me to this very day. Her eyes were wide open and she still had that evil grin on her face. I was so freaked out that I couldn't bear to stay in the kitchen a moment longer. Without saying a word, I backed out of the room and made my way towards the front door. I jumped on my bike and began cycling as fast as I could down the long, winding driveway and all the way across town. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my house. It wasn't until a few days later that I found out why my friend Brenda had been absent from school. My parents told me that there had been a tragic death in Brenda's family. "What?" I asked. "Who died?" My parents broke the sad news to me and it made my hair stand on end and I was crying from fright. Brenda's mother had died suddenly and the night I called over to her house, Brenda had been at her grandparents' place, attending the funeral. Years later, when I was 16 years old, I made a little extra money by working as a babysitter on weekends. One evening, a friend of mine called me and said she knew a family who desperately needed a babysitter. She was busy and wanted to know if I was interested in babysitting for them instead. She told me the parents were very nice, the pay was good and their 3-year-old daughter was polite and well-behaved. I wasn't doing anything important so I told her I would be glad to take the job. That evening, I went to the family's house and met the mother. Her name was Ruth and she was getting ready to go out for the night with friends. She mentioned that her husband was out of town on business and gave me some numbers to call if I needed to get in touch with her. The night went very easily. I made dinner for the little girl, gave her a bubble bath, then got her dressed for bed. I was around midnight when I heard the front door open and footsteps coming down the hallway. I thought it was strange because I hadn't even heard a car pull up. Turning around, I was relieved to see Ruth making her way into the living room where I was sitting watching TV. She never said a word to me and as she walked past me, I was surprised by how different she looked. Something about her eyes had changed and she was grinning from ear to ear. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I knew that evil grin. I had seen it before, many years ago. Ruth sat at the dining table with her back turned towards me. Her hands hung limp by her sides. Her head was cocked to the left. She was humming to herself. "Ruth?" I asked, nervously. "Ruth, are you all right?" No answer. "Ruth? You're not alive anymore, are you?" Silence. With shaking hands, I quickly gathered my things and backed out of the room. When I got to the hallway, I opened the front door and looked outside. There was no car in the driveway. All of a sudden, the eerie silence was broken by the sound of the phone ringing. I didn't want to answer it. I was afraid of what I might hear. For a moment, my hand seemed to hover over the phone. Then I lifted the receiver and put it to my ear. I already knew who it was. It was the police, calling to tell me that Ruth had been involved in a car accident an hour ago. She had been killed on impact. Tears were streaming down my face as I ran upstairs, grabbed Ruth's daughter from her bed and bundled her up in her blanket. As I came back downstairs, I had to pass by the door to the living room. I could still see Ruth sitting at the table with her back to me. Without pausing for a second, I ran out into the night, carrying the little girl in my arms. The Flypaper is a scary episode of tales of the unexpected about a girl on a bus who is accosted by a creepy old man. It's based on a short story by Elizabeth Taylor, the writer, not the actress. It's not very well known, but everyone who has seen it describes it as chilling, disturbing and terrifying in his introduction. Roald Dahl says it's so neat and nice and spooky that I only wish I had thought of it myself. When the story begins, the police are dragging the marshes looking for a missing schoolgirl. The hunt for 12-year-old Elaine Phillips continues. Elaine has been missing from her home for 5 days now, and police have issued another appeal today for any information that might help in the search for the Northwood schoolgirl. Elaine is slender and 5 feet tall. She was wearing a school uniform of gray skirt and maroon blazer when she was last seen by 2 of her classmates. The story centers around an 11-year-old girl named Sylvia. Ever since her parents died in a car crash, her life has taken a turn for the worse. She is quiet, sad and sullen and can't stand living with her grandmother who cares more about her roses than she does about Sylvia. One day, when she is on her way home from her piano lessons, Sylvia notices a strange man watching her. He gives her the creeps, and every time she looks over her shoulder, the man is there. Sylvia suspects he is following her, so she runs all the way home. When she gets back to the house, she tries to tell her grandmother about the man who was following her, but the old woman isn't interested. Never talk to strangers, her grandmother says. That's a basic rule for girls your age. But I wasn't talking to him, Sylvia protests. There's another news report on TV about the missing girl. The body of Elaine Phillips, age 12, has been found in the Northwoods marshes. Police and frogmen have been searching the area since Friday. Every Wednesday, after school, Sylvia has to go to piano lessons. She feels trapped in her life. She doesn't have any friends in school. She hates school, she hates church, she hates piano lessons. She wishes she could be invisible or maybe just disappear. On the bus, a man sits down opposite her. Sylvia thinks she recognizes him. He's the man who was following her the day before. The man attempts to strike up a conversation with her. I believe I've seen you before, he says, wending your way either to or from a music lesson, I imagine. Sylvia puts her head down and tries to ignore him. I used to do that when I was a child, the man says. Make myself invisible and goodbye, nasty world. When the bus conductor comes to collect the fares, Sylvia pays for her ticket. The man buys a ticket for the same destination. Sylvia is disgusted when the man changes seats and sits down beside her. I'm very fond of children, you know, he says. I treat children on my own level. Another passenger, an old lady, sees that the man is bothering Sylvia and making her uncomfortable. The old lady shoots him a disapproving look and says, I know your sort. Sylvia gets off the bus one stop early to avoid the old man. She runs to a phone box, intending to call the police, but the phone is out of order. All of a sudden, she hears the dreaded voice behind her. Looking for some spare change? She spins around. It's the creepy old man from the bus. It's broken, Sylvia replies in a trembling voice. Oh, what a pity, the man giggles. The embarrassment she suffered on the bus gives way to terror. Go away or I'll scream, Sylvia warns. Just then, the old woman from the bus appears. Sylvia is relieved to see her. She hits the old man with her umbrella. Be off with you, she shouts. Leave that little girl alone. The old man reluctantly leaves, muttering to himself. Didn't your mother ever warn you not to talk to strangers? The old woman asks sternly. She's dead, Sylvia replies. Oh, I'm sorry, says the old lady. Well, you can come with me. I think we ought to phone the police, don't you? I think the police would be very interested in what happened on the bus today. They start walking, and when Sylvia glances back, she sees the man standing in the distance, glaring at them. The old woman brings Sylvia to her house and makes her a cup of tea. She tells the girl to put some biscuits out on the table while she phones the police. Sylvia hears the front door opening. The old woman turns around and smiles. "Hello, Herbert," she says. "You're just in time. The tea's ready." Sylvia is horrified as the dreadful truth finally dawns on her. The old man locks the door. There's a roll of flypaper hanging in the window, with a few flies stuck to it. "Ah, caught another one," he grins. It's the sweetness that attracts them, you see, and then the stickiness that prevents them getting away. As the old couple pull down the window blinds, Sylvia makes a desperate attempt to get away. The old man and woman grab her by the neck and shove her back into the chair. "You haven't had your tea," they say with a smile.